You clicked because you saw something that shouldn't exist. A forest, hidden inside the Sahara Desert, the hottest, driest place most of us can imagine, and somehow green things are living there. Right now, as you read this, trees are standing in that sand and refusing to die. Here's what nobody told you. Those trees are not surviving because of rain. They are surviving because of a trick with water that human beings figured out over 2,000 years ago and then slowly forgot. A trick so cheap it costs about $1 to copy in your own backyard. A trick that can cut the water your garden drinks by up to 70%. I know how that sounds. I didn't believe it either. But this is a real method written down in an ancient farming document from the 1st century before Christ, and I'm going to hand you the exact way to use it before this is over. Stay with me, because the most surprising part is not the desert. It's how quietly this simple thing was pushed out of our lives so we'd pay every single month for something our great-grandparents did for free. Let me tell you where this started for me. 2 summers ago, I was standing in my own backyard in late July, holding a water bill that had climbed to almost $90 for a single month. My tomatoes were still wilting by afternoon. I remember thinking, I am doing everything the store told me to do, and it is not working. That bill is what sent me down this road. So let me start with the thing that broke my brain first. The forest that isn't supposed to be there. For most of my life, when I pictured the Sahara, I pictured nothing. Sand to the horizon, empty, dead. That's the picture we all carry. But in the year 2020, a team of scientists led by a researcher named Martin Brandt published a study in the journal Nature that quietly turned that picture upside down. They used satellite images and a computer trained to count individual trees, not forests. Individual trees, one by one, across the western Sahara and the drylands just south of it. They expected to find almost nothing. Instead, they counted more than 1.8 billion trees. Let me say that number again so it lands. 1.8 billion trees standing in a place we were all taught was empty. Now here's the question that grabbed me and would not let go. How? How does a tree live in a place that might see 1 or 2 inches of rain in an entire year, if it sees any at all? A tree in my yard in good soil, with regular rain, still dies if I forget to water it for 2 weeks in the heat. So how is a tree living for decades on almost nothing? The answer is that these desert trees are geniuses at one single thing. They do not waste a drop. Every bit of moisture that reaches their roots is captured, held, and used slowly. They do not drink from the top down the way we water our gardens, splashing water on the surface where the sun steals most of it before it ever reaches the roots. They drink from deep and slow, right at the root, where nothing is lost. And that right there is the whole secret. Not some rare desert magic, just water delivered slowly, underground, straight to the roots, with almost nothing wasted to the air. The desert trees do it with deep roots and hard-earned survival. But human beings, thousands of years ago, figured out how to do the exact same thing on purpose for a garden with a single cheap object you can hold in one hand. I found that object, and once I understood what it was, I got a little angry. Because I had been paying for the expensive version of this my whole adult life without ever knowing the free version existed, let me tell you what that object is and why it vanished from our lives. The tool is a clay pot, an unglazed one, the plain rough kind made from fired earth. You bury it in the soil up to its neck, right next to your plants, and you fill it with water. That's it. That is the entire machine. Because the clay is porous, the water slowly seeps out through the walls of the pot into the surrounding soil, but only as fast as the soil and the roots actually pull it. The plant drinks exactly what it needs, right at the root, underground, where the sun can't steal it. They have a name for it. In many places it's called an olla, spelled O-L-L-A, an old Spanish word for pot. And this is not some clever new invention somebody is selling on television. This method is written down in one of the oldest farming books that survives anywhere on earth. It is a Chinese agricultural text called the Fan Shengzi Shu, written in the 1st century before Christ, more than 2,000 years ago. In that document, farmers were told to bury a clay pot, fill it with water, and let it seep out to nourish the crops. 2,000 years ago, This was simply how you grew food where water was precious. And it didn't just live in China. Archaeologists have found evidence of buried clay pot irrigation across North Africa, in the dry lands around the very desert we started with. In parts of India and Iran, farmers have used ollas continuously for centuries, passing the knowledge from parent to child at the edge of the field, the same way a recipe gets passed down at a kitchen table. So here's the question that started to bother me. If this method is 2,000 years old, if it works so well that whole civilizations in the driest places on Earth relied on it, then why had I never heard of it? Why did nobody tell me? I grew up thinking the only way to water a garden was a hose, a sprinkler, or an expensive plastic system you buy in a kit. How does something this good just disappear? I'm going to answer that, and the answer is where this story turns. But first, you need to understand just how well this actually works, because the numbers are what made me stop laughing and start digging in my own yard. There's a researcher named David Bainbridge who spent years studying old low water growing methods, and he documented buried clay pot irrigation in detail. What he and others found is not a small improvement. Compared to watering the ordinary way, from the top, buried clay pots can cut water use by 50 to 70% while growing the same plants, sometimes better plants. Let me put that in plain terms. For every 10 buckets of water you would normally pour on a garden, you might use 3 or 4. The rest, the water that used to evaporate into the summer air or run off across the surface, simply isn't needed anymore. Think back to my $90 water bill. Cut the biggest chunk of that in half or better, and you start to understand why I could not stop thinking about a clay pot. But the water savings is only half of it. The other half is what it does to the plants themselves. Because the water is delivered slow and steady, right at the roots, the plant never goes through the boom and drought cycle that top watering creates, where the soil is soaked one day and bone dry 2 days later. The roots get a constant, gentle supply. Old gardeners who used this method reported stronger plants, more fruit, and far less time spent standing there with a hose every evening. And here is a detail I love. Because the water goes underground and the surface stays dry, weeds have a much harder time sprouting. Weed seeds need wet surface soil to germinate. Keep the top dry and the deep soil moist, and you quietly starve the weeds while you feed the tomatoes. Our great-grandparents didn't have a scientific paper to explain that. They just knew it worked. So now we come back to the hard question. If this was common knowledge for 2,000 years, who benefited from us forgetting it? Here's what I've come to believe, and I want to be careful and honest with you about it. Nobody held a secret meeting to ban the clay pot. It's quieter and sadder than that. Starting in the middle of the last century, roughly the 1950s and 60s, cheap plastic and cheap city water arrived at the same time. Suddenly, water felt free and endless, and there was money to be made selling hoses, sprinkler timers, drip line kits, plastic fittings, and every year a new upgrade. A clay pot you buy once and use for years does not make anybody a monthly profit. A watering system with parts that crack, clog, and need replacing every season, watering that runs your meter all summer, that is a business. So the free method didn't get banned. It just stopped being advertised. It fell out of the garden books. It stopped being the thing your neighbor showed you over the fence because your neighbor was at the hardware store buying a kit too. Within about 2 generations, a 2,000-year-old piece of common sense became something almost nobody remembered. Not because it stopped working, because there was more money in the version that keeps you paying. That's the part that got under my skin. I wasn't kept in the dark by a villain in a suit. I was just quietly steered, year after year, toward the version with a monthly bill attached. And the moment I understood that, I wanted the old way back. Now, I know exactly what some of you are thinking right now, because I thought it too. You're thinking, this sounds nice for somebody with time and a big garden and a shed full of supplies, but it's not for me. Maybe you think you're too old to start digging around in the yard. Maybe you're too busy. Maybe you rent, or you only have a few pots on a patio, or you're sure you'd need special equipment you don't have. I want to talk to you specifically for a minute because this next part I put together just for the person who's already decided this isn't for them. You do not need a garden. You do not need special equipment. You do not need to buy a single thing tonight to try the heart of this. Here is what you can do this evening with what is almost certainly already in your home. That's the part that got under my skin, and if you want to go even deeper into this kind of recovered knowledge, I want to tell you about something that helped me pull it all together. While I was doing this research, I wrote down everything I kept finding, the methods, the history, the exact step-by-step ways to use them, and put it into a book. It's called First Wins, and it's part of a larger system I put together called Deep Leverage and the Full System. These are the forgotten practical things that used to be common sense before we were handed a monthly bill instead. If you want to go further than this video can take you, the link is in the description. But let's come back to the hard question, because the answer is where this story really turns. Find any unglazed clay pot? The plain terracotta kind that a plant might come in from the store, the rough orange ones. If you have one sitting empty in the garage or on the porch, that's perfect. The only rule is that it cannot be sealed or painted or glazed shiny because the water has to be able to sweep through the clay. Take that pot, and if it has a hole in the bottom, plug the hole with a cork, a wad of clay, a stone pressed into a bit of putty. Even a wine cork will do. Now bury it or nestle it deep into the soil of a large planter or garden bed so that only the top rim sticks out above the dirt. Set your plant right beside it, within a hand's width. Fill the clay pot with water. Cover the top with a saucer or a flat stone so bugs and mosquitoes stay out and the water doesn't evaporate off the top. That's it. You just built the exact machine described in a document from 2,000 years ago, and it cost you nothing but a pot you already owned. Over the next day or two, watch the soil around it. You'll see it stays evenly, gently moist while the very surface stays dry. Check the water level in the pot every couple of days and top it off. You have just cut your watering for that plant by more than half, and you did it while sitting in the same house with the same body, the same schedule, and the same budget you have right now. No expertise, no purchase, no excuse. I started with exactly one pot next to one struggling tomato plant. I did not believe it would do much. Within a week, that plant had stopped wilting in the afternoon heat, and I was refilling that pot maybe twice a week instead of dragging the hose out every single evening. One pot changed my mind. That's all it took. But once I saw it work, I wanted to know the very best way to do it, the cheapest, most effective version. And that search led me to the thing I most want to give you, the piece that pulled everything together and made me feel like I'd finally recovered something that was stolen from all of us without our noticing. Because here's the problem I ran into, and maybe you're already seeing it. If you go looking to buy a real olla, a purpose-made buried watering pot, you'll find them. And you'll find they cost $20, $30, sometimes $40 each for one. And a real garden needs several. Suddenly, the free ancient method has a price tag again, and we are right back where we started, paying good money for something that should cost almost nothing. I nearly gave up right there. I thought, of course, even the old free method has been turned into another expensive product. But then I found the way around it. And this is the secret I promised you at the beginning. While digging through old low-water gardening records and the work of researchers like David Bainbridge, who spent years recovering exactly these forgotten desert methods, I found the trick that the people who actually used ollas for a living knew. You do not need to buy a special olla at all. You can make one, a real fully working one, from 2 ordinary terracotta pots, the cheap kind that cost about $1 a piece at any garden store, and often less at a yard sale or a thrift shop. Here is exactly how. You take 2 of those plain clay pots of the same size, the ones with a drainage hole in the bottom. You plug the hole in one of them the same way I described before, with a cork or a dab of waterproof putty or silicone. Then you take the second pot, flip it upside down, and set it rim to rim on top of the first, so the 2 pots form a closed hollow chamber, like a clay balloon, with the 2 openings sealed together. You seal that seam where the rims meet with a little waterproof glue or silicone, and you leave the top hole, the drainage hole of the upside down pot, open. That top hole is your fill spout. You bury the whole thing up to that top hole, fill it with water, cap it with a stone, and you have built, for around $2 in materials, the exact same device people are selling for $40. It seeps water through all that clay surface, straight to the roots, underground, slow and perfect, just like the trees standing in the Sahara. And here is the detail that almost nobody mentions, the part that made me sit back in my chair. The size of the buried pot roughly controls how large an area it waters. A pot about the size of a 1-gallon container will quietly feed the roots of the plants within a radius of about 1.5 feet all around it, and depending on the heat, one filling can last several days. Space these homemade pots through a garden bed, and you can water an entire vegetable patch with a fraction of the water, filling a few pots twice a week, instead of standing there every evening with a hose watching most of your water and most of your money evaporate into the air. Let me put the whole thing together for you the way it finally came together for me. The desert trees survive by getting water slow, deep, and straight to the root, wasting nothing. 2,000 years ago, farmers in China, North Africa, Persia, and India copied that idea with a buried clay pot and wrote it into their oldest books. It worked so well it fed people in the driest places on earth for 20 centuries. Then, in the span of about 2 generations, cheap plastic and the business of monthly water bills quietly pushed it out of our memory, and we started paying every summer for the privilege of doing a worse job. And the whole time, the fix cost about $1 and sat forgotten on a shelf in the garden store, hiding in plain sight. I want to give you a few honest details so you actually succeed with this, because I made mistakes and I don't want you to repeat them. First, it has to be unglazed clay. I wasted a week with a glazed decorative pot wondering why the water just sat there. The shiny coating seals the clay and stops the seeping. Plain, rough, matte terracotta only. Second, cap the top. An open pot loses water to evaporation and becomes a home for mosquitoes, and a flat stone or a saucer fixes both problems for free. Third, don't panic about the exact water level. Just check every 2 or 3 days at first until you learn how fast your particular plants and your particular heat drink it down. After a week, you'll know your own rhythm and you'll barely think about it. Fourth, in the coldest months, if you get hard freezes, lift the pots or empty them, because water freezing inside can crack the clay. Empty clay in the ground is fine. Full clay in a deep freeze can split. Now let me tell you what this actually did for me over a full season, because the numbers are the reason I bothered to make this for you. That backyard that cost me almost $90 in water in a single peak summer month, the following year, with buried clay pots through the beds, I cut my summer watering dramatically and my plants did better, not worse. My tomatoes stopped their afternoon collapse, my peppers set more fruit than they ever had, and the weeds, because the surface stayed dry, thinned out on their own without me pulling my back apart every weekend. I spent a few dollars on cheap terracotta pots one single time, and I have used them every season since, with nothing to replace, nothing to plug in, nothing to renew, no kit, no timer, no subscription, no bill. That's the thing that stays with me. This was never lost because it stopped working. It was lost because working perfectly and costing almost nothing is bad for business. Somewhere out there, families in the dry corners of the world never forgot. They kept burying the clay pot, kept passing it down, kept the 2,000-year-old knowledge alive at the edge of the field, while the rest of us were sold plastic. And now that knowledge is sitting in your hands tonight, ready to use with a pot you probably already own. You came here because a hidden forest in the desert didn't make sense to you. Now you know its secret was never really about the desert at all. It was about the quiet, stubborn wisdom of giving water slowly, straight to the root, and wasting nothing. That wisdom was taken out of your hands so gently you never even noticed it leave. Tonight you took it back, and that matters. Because if you're the kind of person who made it all the way to the end of this, you're the kind who already trusts your own common sense more than you trust a glossy label promising you the newest, best, most convenient answer for just a monthly fee. You're the kind of person who wants to hand something real and useful down to your kids and your grandkids the way it used to be handed down across a kitchen table. This is one of those things. Keep it, use it, pass it on. So let me ask you something specific, and I really do want you to answer. When you picture trying this, which plant are you going to put your very first buried pot next to? Is it tomatoes, like mine, peppers, a rose bush that never seems happy, a row of herbs on the patio? Tell me in the comments right now the exact plant you're going to try this on first. I read them and I answer And I promise you, someone else reading needs to hear that they're not the only ones starting with a single pot and a lot of doubt. Leave that comment. This audience is quiet, and I'm asking you directly to say something, because the people who share what they're trying are the ones who actually follow through. And if you want more of this, if you want to keep recovering the practical, forgotten things our great-grandparents knew before we started paying monthly for all of it, then come along with the rest of us who are quietly digging this knowledge back up, one method at a time. This isn't about supporting a channel. It's about rebuilding a whole toolkit of the free, simple ways that used to be common sense. Because the next one I'm working on is about a way people kept vegetables fresh for months, right through winter, with no refrigerator and no electricity, using nothing but a hole in the ground and one thing you already throw away. It's older than the clay pot, and honestly, it surprised me even more. I don't want you to miss it. Stay with me, and let's keep bringing the old ways home. Now, this video showed you the idea, but inside the practical wisdom circle, I pick up right where we just stopped, walking you through the full buried clay pot method for your own garden. And if something puzzles you, you ask me directly, and a real person, me, answers you myself. You won't be alone either. Just point your phone's camera at the code on the screen, and you can cancel anytime, one click, no risk,